There's been a lot said about the Murray-Darling Basin plan lately and the federal government's declaration that it would no longer pursue water buybacks in the basin. Now, David McKenzie is the Water Forum co-chair for the Goulburn-Murray Irrigation District. And Flow News 24 caught up with Mr McKenzie recently. He's saying that regardless of what the Liberal and National parties might be saying about their intentions with buybacks, the Basin Plan still has a 2024 end date and very high targets that haven't yet been reached. And as a result, legally, there may be no choice but to go to buybacks by 2024. Let's have a listen.
Our region is a bit concerned, or quite concerned to be honest, about the end of the plan, the pointy end of the plan, which is going to be the hardest, to win the water, to recover for the environment. There's still a lot to do out there. And at 2024, when the plan is close to conclusion, there needs to be a reconciliation of how much water has been recovered for the environment against what the targets. And it's really clear now. The Federal Water Minister has had several reports telling him that the targets will not be met, and that's pretty well understood public knowledge these days, Ricky. So what we're saying is what happens in 2024 when the recovery targets haven't been met, there's a shortfall in water. At the moment, the only option the Federal Water Minister will have at that stage is to go back into the market with more buybacks. And the reason our region is so concerned about that is that has been also proven through multiple independent studies now to cause the most socio-economic impact, unintended consequences and negative impact on third parties in the region who weren't necessarily part of the deal between the environment and the irrigator.
Let's work that back a bit, talking first of all about the conclusion of the plan.
Yep.
So is there an expectation the plan might get an extension of time or there'll be a new plan? Is there any talk around that?
Look, Ricky, I think that's a sensible approach. There is very, very little talk about that. It does seem to our group that that despite this being well understood now, and the future path really being laid out pretty clearly, there doesn't seem to be any real will to come up with a plan B to extend the timelines or to do something different to either sort of allow more projects through to try and recover the water that's involved, or extend the timelines to let it happen in the fullness of time. At the moment, it's just we're going to push on to 2024, we'll do the reconciliation then, and we'll see where we're at. Well, that's just leaving irrigation-dependent regional areas in a great state of uncertainty, really, and taking the regions to the edge of the cliff without a really clearly laid out contingency or plan B.
Yeah, when it comes to what people have talked about in Canberra politics, and there's been some who've called for the pausing of the plan or the rhetoric pause the plan, is that what you understand some people will be talking about, is that we need to just take a slower approach because we've got a deadline approaching and the targets can't be met?
I think, well, that's a really interesting question. I think people mean lots of different things when they're saying things like pause the plan or stop the plan. There is no political will anywhere in any party to significantly alter the Murray-Darling Basin plan in terms of the ultimate targets and the ambitions they have for recovering water for the environment. But knowing that it's actually going to fail now in terms of how much they're going to recover for their targets by the deadline, it's pretty apparent that you don't need to pause it or anything like that, but you need to start devising a plan B because we know that this is actually not going to work. So instead of just rushing on and ignoring the reality now, our region is asking, and I think many others would be as well, let's start trying to develop a clear pathway forward. If you're not going to change the targets, if you're not going to change the ambitions or the goals of the plan, and that's up for contest as well, but if that is locked in, we need to have a sensible conversation about how it's going to happen instead of just ignoring reality at the moment because it is, well, as I say, multiple credible reports have now told the Federal Water Minister that the recovery targets won't be met by 2024.
So the 2024 target, I guess when the plan was first conceived, that seemed a long way away. It's now less than 3 years away. It would take some sort of heroic effort, I imagine, for suddenly an acceleration that would reach those targets, unless, as you're saying, there was suddenly a splurge of buybacks to reach that target at the end of the plan. And how does that sit with the government saying, well, they're not going to have any more buybacks between now and the end of the plan?
There's some policy dissonance there, Ricky, which is
a good
absolutely
term.
Picked up on.
Yeah.
We're very pleased that the government, the coalition government, has a no buybacks policy, but they haven't moved to legislate that. They talk about the political reality of not controlling the upper house, not being able to get that change through. However, just ignoring it and saying we're not going to do any buybacks, but the plan's not going to meet its targets by 2024 either, and we're not actively planning for a contingency. It's just believing investment in irrigation areas is going to become increasingly fraught, I think, and regional confidence in those irrigation-dependent regions as well will suffer unless the government can articulate, we understand that there's going to be some problems in 2024 and this is how we're going to try and step our way through them. That conversation needs to start, and it needs to start at the highest levels of leadership.
And so to come back to your original premise, if we get to 2024 and there's a view or belief, whoever's in government, that we need to reach that target, you're saying, well, buybacks is really that's a way that we'll be back on the table post-plan.
Yes, that option is still there within the legislation to allow the federal government to step into water markets and pursue buyback, and that's all they're going to be able to do at short notice at the end of the plan.
Yeah.
It'll be, it takes years to work up these major water savings projects to develop them, to get them audited and get them banked against the recovery target.
Yep. So that's
you can't just sort of do this stuff in a couple of months at the end of 2024.
Yeah. So that's what you're saying is, in effect, regardless of what the government have said about no more buybacks as a policy position, without the law being changed, let's say there's a Labor federal government after the next election, they'll have the legal right to continue to pursue buybacks regardless of what the government have previously said.
Absolutely right, Ricky. Whatever stripe of government is in 2024, not only will they have a legal right to do more buybacks, it will be their only option.
And then that's as you've pointed to, there's the fractious scenario where they won't likely be able to legislate no buybacks between now and when they might theoretically lose government, because you've got the Greens and Senator Rex Patrick in South Australia and others that are not likely to support such an initiative.
Yes, that's right. But I think having strong positions on recovery targets and finalisation and implementation of the plan is one thing, but everyone just pretending this reality is not happening is not healthy for our region and for the entire environmental reform, what's more. So whether it's Rex Patrick, whether it's any crossbencher, whether it's the Greens, Labor or the Coalition, surely they're mature enough to sit down and say, there are some actual realities here now. We really understand that the targets won't be met by 2024. We can all say, they've got to be, but what should we all do about this, and have a really mature bipartisan political conversation for the benefit of the regions and the environment.
We'll follow this up with Flow News 24 with the Minister and responsible stakeholders, because it is a really important conversation about when we get to the end of the plan, where do we go from there. So thanks for your time and your comments today.
Good on you. Thanks, Ricky.